Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be talking about European colonization a lot more in depth for Unit 4. And so we have started looking and examining those motives in great detail. And we took some time and we created a colony. And that was really an introductory lesson to kind of make you think about what our settlers had to experience, those decisions that they had to make, and how they were faced with difficulties. And so we're going to take a closer look, though, at colonization. So today's going to be more of a lecture day. I want you to get your notes ready and keep in mind that we have already learned some of this information, and so we're just going to refresh our memories. So if you recall, back when we were talking about the Age of Exploration, England and Spain were great political and economic and religious rivals. We learned a lot about that. In particular, we learned about Drake and how he conquered the Spanish Armada, and he was hired by Queen Elizabeth. So Spain had many colonies in the Americas, if you recall, mostly in South Central America, but because of Drake conquering the Spanish Armada and the Spanish fleet, it was then that England was able to focus and become a more dominant country. So here's what we need you to do. We want you to set your notes up that look just like this. So on a piece of paper, on the left-hand side, you need to write causes, and you should have 4 boxes. And on the right-hand side, rather, you're going to have the effects. And then in the center, we want you to write in the following. Wars broke out in Europe, European countries created colonies, European countries established alliances, and Protestant Reformation. So take a moment, pause right now, and set up your page. Thanks for setting up your notes. So now let's take a little bit of a closer look at this idea called mercantilism. And we've learned a little bit about it, and in the coming days we'll look more at this. But basically, you need to know that Europe used mercantilism, and it was popular in the 1500s, mainly because of this new idea of colonization. It's easy to see how this concept came into practice because the Americas are a perfect place for Europeans to find a supply of raw materials, and that's what they needed. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. England would buy materials from New England, so the lumber, for example, for a very, very low price, and then they would take that lumber and sell it to the parent country or the mother country. They would build a ship, and then they're going to sell it back to the colonists at a higher price. So it was meant to serve the interests of the empire, so not the colonists, not the colony. The benefit here is the mother or the parent country. So take a note here that colonies could not sell their raw materials to anyone but their mother country, and we're going to take a closer look at that in the coming days. So here are some rules about mercantilism. And again, we'll take a closer look at this. But between 1651 and 1673, there's 4 navigation acts that are meant to encourage mercantilism. The English colonial ships could carry cargo between imperial ports only. Certain goods, including tobacco, rice, and furs, could not be shipped by foreign nations. This is really important. We'll take a look at that in the coming days. The English Parliament would pay what we call bounties to Americans to produce certain raw goods. So this also allows for tariffs to be raised on the same goods that are produced by other nations. Americans could not compete with English manufacturers because of the large scale of manufacturing, and the mother country, or England in this case, has to have a favorable balance of trade. So these are all things that we're going to take a closer look at in the coming days. This is just to kind of give you some sense of where we're heading. So pause and add to your notes now. In the center, we have wars that are breaking out. So this is the event that's occurring. What caused this is because of mercantilism. Each country wanted to export more than it imported. So they wanted to make money as much as possible. It was impossible for every country to have this idea of a favorable balance of trade. And so as a result of that, we have an effect. Countries attempted to secure colonies to increase their wealth and form alliances to increase their power. And we're going to talk about alliances in our next slide. So pause and record the following. So we have some wars going on in Europe, and it's this whole idea of economic competition. We've been talking about this idea of mercantilism, and there are several changes that are occurring in the 15 and 1600s. One of those reasons is this theory of mercantilism. Countries are very competitive with one another, and they're trying to ensure economic power, economic stability. So colonies are extremely important in this idea of competition because of those natural resources. So Americas have many natural resources in the colonies, and it's going to provide a lot of materials that can be manufactured in those parent mother countries. So for example, there's fields of cotton, there's sugar cane, and all of those materials are going to help increase the wealth of a country. So obviously we want to compete as a European country. So the European colonizers, they create those large farms, they create plantations, they grow large amounts of what we call cash crops, things like sugar, molasses, rum, and they're selling those for a profit. They're shipping those to England, and then those materials are going to be processed there. So here's what's key, and this is what makes this so important. The colonizing countries get huge profits because basically they're only paying for that labor and transportation. The raw material itself is free. So think about that. If you're building a house and the materials themselves are free and you're only paying for the labor of your creating it, you're going to see that it's going to be a much cheaper process. And that's exactly what's happening with these mother and parent countries. So here's what we need you to do now. Pause and add to your notes. We have natural resources that are available. We talked about that in this new world, including things like lumber. And these resources, these natural resources, are going to make these colonies desirable. So the event that's going to happen here is that European countries are going to establish these colonies. The direct result or the effect of that is that colonizers are going to now need to create larger farms or plantations to grow for that demand for those crops. And countries are going to earn huge profits based off of that those cash crops. All right, another major influencer during this time period is the political power and alliances. So in addition to competing for economic wealth, Europeans are also competing for power. They want more power. They're very greedy in this case. And so a king is going to increase his wealth by taking over and conquering territories. So countries made alliances by promising to protect one another and to keep each other safe from common enemies. And then also, countries make alliances through other means, things like marriage. So it was not uncommon for princes and princesses, or sons and daughters, to marry one another from different countries in order to gain those alliances to gain power. And then that would allow them to merge their countries together. So again, pause and add to your notes. In this case, we have effects. We have European countries that are establishing alliances. What's happening is we have Europeans that are competing for power, and they're gaining influence by conquering the territories of others. So direct result, we have monarchs that are gaining control of new lands, and we have alliances that are allowing countries to join together and unify. And this is through marriage as well as conquering territories. We've learned a whole lot about religion and the conflicts and the issues that are happening in Europe during this time period. So just to remind you, one of those other effects is the Protestant Reformation, and that's when we have a challenge of authority in religious stance. We have the Roman Catholic Church, and we have Protestants that are struggling for religious, economic, and political power. Now, we've learned quite a bit about this, so just remember that it's important for us to think about how these groups of people wanted to conquer and convert each other, and they made each other's lives extremely difficult in any way possible. So they would have laws that would make lives uncomfortable. They would have taxes, they would have threats of their lives, they would torture individuals. There was also imprisonment and war. So obviously all these things adding up together are really good reason for people who are experiencing religious intolerance to leave. So these people are persecuted, and they decide in many cases to live in a community with others who are like them, like-minded, that they are persecuted. And so the New World is an example of how that would be tempting. So again, pause your notes and let's take a look and write down the following. So we have the Protestant Reformation, and what's happening is we have individuals who are challenging the authority of the church. And the direct result or the effect of this is that we have rulers who make new religions. We have subjects that are considered treasonous, that are rebellious, and are facing difficulty from taxation, imprisonment, threats on their life, increased laws, and increased taxes. And so we have a group of people who feel religiously persecuted, and then they decide to leave and colonize the New World. So in the coming days, we're going to take a look at our first colony, and the first English colony in North America, which is Roanoke. And so Roanoke does an excellent job of showing some of the ways in which political, economic, and religious competition affected colonization. And those are all the things that we just talked about. So we'll be learning more about that in the coming days.